New film, written in stone, the evidence for King David. For those who believe the Bible, King David was the ruler of ancient Israel. But for a long time, skeptics said there was no proof he existed. Now CBN's new documentary, written in stone, House of David, examines how archaeologists are finding more and more evidence of that biblical kingdom.
The Bible records David's story in great detail, from his childhood as a shepherd in Bethlehem to his death in the royal palace of Jerusalem. But for centuries, the Bible was the only evidence that David existed. For a group of so-called minimalist historians, the biblical record wasn't enough. One Bible professor even compared David to the mythical King Arthur.
They said, well, the biblical tradition has been written only in the Hellenistic period, everything is legend, and no David, no Solomon, and no kingdom of Judah, no temple in Jerusalem, and so on and so forth. They said the Bible is mythology, nothing is true. But then came the Tel Dan Stela.
20 miles east of the Dead Sea, in what is now Jordan, a stone tablet, or stela, was discovered in 1868. The inscription on the stone dates to around 840 BC, less than 200 years after David's rule. It was written by a Moabite king named Mesha, an enemy of Israel. And it contains the first known reference to the house of David outside the Bible. On the stone, Mesha talks about being taxed by and later rebelling against the house of David. A story also recorded in 2 Kings chapter 3. The same phrase, house of David, turned up on another stone more than a century later, this time in northern Israel, in the ruins of a city known as Tel Dan.
The shadow of Mount Hermon, the Dan River comes out, and there's an ancient city there with mud brick arches close to 4,000 years old from the time of Abraham, and with remains from the time of the kings of Judah, including a high place where idols were served. That's an event mentioned in the Bible.
In 1993, Israeli archaeologists found an inscription near the remains of the city gates. Written in the 9th century BC, the Tel Dan Stela is believed to be the earliest non-biblical mention of David.
The king who writes that down is Hazael, and he actually brags. He's bragging to his friends all around, I have succeeded Jehoram, the Jewish king from the house of David. In order for him to succeed over the Jewish king from the house of David, there needs to be a fight with the house of David. And we know Jehoram because Jehoram actually exists in the house of David from the 9th century BCE. This still is amazing because it's something like 80 years after King David has passed away. So there is already a dynasty, and you find it in Israel. The significance is that he has been recognized by another king who actually talks about fighting with him.
It was such a dramatic event that it's recorded in the Stela and also in the Bible.
The stele coming from Tel Dan was a big wow, and it actually proved for the first time the existence of the dynasty of King David, which was back then a challenge.
So you cannot claim anymore that King David is a mythological figure. In this moment, the mythological paradigm collapsed. A few years later came the low chronology paradigm. These guys said, okay, there was David, but he was only a Bedouin sheikh living in a tent. And in his period, there were no fortified cities, no administration, no writing, no central authority. And then came Chebet Kayafa excavation.